Hello, everyone. Welcome to the University of the Underground. We are a free, pluralistic, and transnational university and charity founded in 2017 in the basement of a nightclub. I am Naum, the head of program of I Want to Believe, an investigation into religion and belief systems. And as a part of this 3-month practice-based program, we are unraveling belief systems, relationships with politics, economics, nation states, and society. I would like to welcome our students and also to all our visiting participants who we kindly ask you for a donation to our charity. This donation will go towards supporting the tuition-free programs that we have and educators' fees. So we appreciate that support from all our visiting participants. We are going to have a talk now, which would last around 45 minutes, and then we'll have a bit of time for Q&A for the students of the program. Having said all that, I would like to introduce someone I've been very excited to meet. Dudeck is an artist, witch doctor, and cultural engineer who invents their own queer religion as art. They have performed, exhibited, screened, and published in over 25 countries and in over 50 independent commissions worldwide. The work examines the nature of belief practices in the information age and the relations to mythology, speculative fiction, and magic. Their invented religion called religionbeer.us, which is a transmedial space opera whose episodes are performed, exhibited, screened, and published in a series of ongoing transmedial episodes. Also, they are currently a practice-led PhD jointly supervised by Yes, sorry. Okay, I'm hearing my echo, so please mute yourselves. Supervised by Edinburgh College of Art and School of Divinity at University of Edinburgh, and live and work between Edinburgh, Glasgow, and Rome. The work has been published in peer-reviewed journals, artistic publications, web-based multimedia articles and exhibitions as well. They are co-director alongside Martina Raponi of the Ansible Institute, a nomadic research lab exploring science fiction as strategy in the information age. So after all those words, thank you for being here. This is all yours now.
Thank you. Okay, so let me just, I'm a little bit of a tech, well, I guess I'm not, let me just try the share screen. If it's working, is it working?
It works.
Okay, so then I'm gonna enter my slideshow. So now it's, I can't see, but you guys can see, and it looks clean and crisp. Yeah, okay. Hi, everyone. Hi. It's wonderful to meet you, and it's a wonderful, I'm greatly honored to be invited to speak at your opening symposium and at the start of this I Want to Believe program. I'm a huge fan of University Underground, and I had the great privilege of lecturing last year as part of the If I Can't Dance, I Don't Want to Be Part of Your Revolution program, but this program is even what I would even say is closer to my heart, because it goes to the very core of what I've, as an artist and cultural engineer and a scholar of religion, what I've been looking at for the past 13 years, looking at and producing as art. So yeah, I'm gonna just, as we said, I'll talk for about 40 minutes, hopefully. Oh yeah, I'm gonna put the timer, because sometimes I talk for 3 hours, I don't even realize it. I'm gonna sort of talk a little bit about my work, but also within a larger conversation of the idea of invented religions, or what it means to invent a religion. So I've just finished a practice-based PhD, which looked very closely at my own invented religion in relationship to the larger phenomenon of invented religions emerging largely since the 1950s. And you know, if I say invented religions, you probably assume like, okay, someone invented their own religion. That's true, but invented religions is also a category within the research of new religious movements. It describes a particular form of new religious movement, which emerges largely out of speculative fiction narratives. So I'll talk a little bit more about that and introduce it further. You might have heard of Jediism, or matrixism, or other kinds of new religions that come out of popular culture. But that's largely what we're talking about here when I use the term invented religion. So the title of my PhD thesis was called Make Belief, the Art of Inventing Religions. Now, obviously, I know probably a large percentage of people here are not necessarily native English language speakers, but came to it. I grew up in Canada. And so in English, when you're a child, there's a typical kind of game called make believe. I'm sure that you have different versions of it in different cultures and different languages. But the idea of make believe is basically when children produce a fiction, maybe let's say where they're a princess that lives in a magical castle, and they'll often play games inside of this fiction, and they'll often ask the adults or their friends to believe in the fiction as long as they're playing the game. But what also often happens in childhood is that some of these fictions don't stop when the game stops. So, you know, maybe some of you when you were young had an invisible friend, or maybe you had an invisible world that you lived in that you asked the adults in your life to take seriously, or maybe you created an avatar, like you were that princess all the time or whenever you wanted it to be. So this is what I find, I'm very interested in the relationship between make believe and make belief. So what happens, you know, what's the difference between, let's say, a child who creates a fictional universe where they're a princess in a castle, and a mythology of a religion where a magical man walks on water? How different are these inventions? This is at the core of my question. So I'm not going to read this full excerpt, but this is comes from a theorist named Richard Schechner. And he describes the difference between make believe and make belief. So again, I won't read the whole thing, but the core here, which I've highlighted in red, is that in make believe performance, the distinction between what's real, excuse me, and what's pretended is kept clear. So when you go to see a film, you temporarily suspend your disbelief in order to enter the reality of the film, which is how your heart can start to race at certain moments, or you can even have visceral reactions to what you're seeing, because your body is actually, for that moment, for that temporal moment, it's suspended its disbelief. And basically, while you're in the fiction, it is real. But then when the film is over, typically, you end that fiction. It's finished. Make belief is a little bit different, and I do this as an artist, and a lot of art sort of explores make belief, where we have people who create avatars for themselves, so they create fictional entities for themselves, and they ask you as the audience to suspend your disbelief permanently. So for instance, I'll talk about Genesis Breyer P. Orridge, who was the founder of the Temple of Psychic Youth. They created themselves as a fiction, and they live as that fiction. Actually, they passed away in 2020, very sadly. But I think in my own performances, I present myself as a witch doctor, and audience and critics alike often ask, is he really a witch doctor, or is this just an ironic performance? People often ask, what am I being asked to believe in when they enter my work? Because I've constructed a fictional religion. And the question is, you know, and I get asked this question all the time. Whenever I do artist talks, it's like the one question I'm always asked: is your religion real? Do you believe in the fiction you produce? And I always try to not answer that question, because I think it's more interesting if the querent who asks that question actually tries to determine themselves if they believe in what I'm presenting. At the core of my research at the moment, I've kind of identified two central questions. So I'm going to just go through them really briefly. The first one: can a person or a people believe in something that they know is a fabrication? And this goes to the core of, I think, I want to believe. In essence, I would say the answer to this question very quickly has to be yes, because if we believe in something like justice or social justice, that is a fiction. I mean, it's not, justice doesn't exist as a universal construct. It is not inherently mammalian. It's not shared amongst every species. It's something that humans invented and developed and created. But I would say I believe in justice, and I believe adamantly in social justice. Anyone who's an activist probably believes in that. But at the same time, you have to accept that that fiction was produced. In a larger sense, the question that I'm interested in is what happens when we encounter a fiction, a story that activates our belief. And I'm sure every one of you has had an artwork or a story or a fiction that you've encountered in your life that has given meaning to your life, and that you even maybe treat as a guidebook for interpreting the world. So can that be your Bible? These are my questions. Can we produce our own belief systems even if we understand the source code of it was created by an artist or was imagined by a thinker? The next question is also very relevant, I think, in this moment of, in this time of the deep fake and fake news and alternative facts. How does something made transform into something believed? Now, I don't want to offend anyone here. I don't know, what religions everybody comes from, but let's just use some of the standard Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha, and Moses. There is no way to prove empirically that any of these beings existed. But we have stories about them, and we have mythologies, and we have whole religious systems that have developed around them. For a great many people, those stories are true, even if they're not factual, even if we can't prove them. So what I'm interested in is what makes certain stories become truth, become belief. What ingredients to those stories are necessary for people to start to actually believe in them? And what I'm finding is that belief has very little to do with fact or truth. Belief has to do with the projection that we place upon an object, an idea, or a story. So, and as an artist, I'm fundamentally interested in exploring, okay, what configurations can we use to construct and direct belief? My PhD, it was a practice-based PhD, and I resisted the idea of a traditional thesis. But I will say that one of the things that it led me to, sort of 4 years immersed in this question, was my own definition of religion, which is this: a religion at its core is a form of multimedia production, capable of inspiring beliefs, generating worldviews, and engineering cultures. So, okay, I'll use the example of a church. You walk into a church for a Sunday service, right? The architecture has been designed based upon spiritual principles and strategically designed in order for acoustics to be carried effectively. As you walk through the building, potentially, depending on which denomination you are, on the walls, there are iconographies that are presenting the mythology, that have been painted, or there's sculptures of characters in the story. At the center of where you sit is a copy of a book that has the story written down. And as well as being written down, the story is told in music, in notation. So you can actually sing parts of the story along with the service. The priests, all of the religious actors are traditionally dressed in some form of costume or vestment to present the mythology or the narrative. And then, of course, there's points where music comes in, and then there's also a sermon where the priest or the pastor will interpret the mythology to make it relevant to the moment. So if you look at that, this is just my example, but I think that it crosses multiple barriers. It's not uniquely Christian. This use of multimedia to present different aspects of the mythology, I will argue, is central to anything that calls itself a religion. And so I treat religion as a kind of artwork. But that artwork tends to have the capacity to produce belief. And this is the thing that I'm particularly interested in, the idea of producing religion, or producing religious experiences. I want to believe, I'm just so excited that your program is called I Want to Believe, because I actually think I want to believe is a kind of overarching statement that defines where we're at this moment in the West. We've, through post-modernity, we deconstructed grand narratives. We've understood the colonial, heteropatriarchal, homophobic, misogynistic source code embedded in religion as a grand narrative. We deconstructed that. We've ripped that apart. We realized that the way in which we've been constructed was strategic and manipulative. But I will argue that we're entering in a kind of a new phase, a slightly meta-modernist phase, where we are now reconstructing. After having dismembered everything, now we're trying to put them back together. And I think there is a yearning for the type of ritual and community that religion produces, but a deep, very valid skepticism and suspicion towards anything that's asking us to believe, because we know very well the harm that comes from that. So I Want to Believe, I think, is a kind of, it's a mission statement. It describes, I mean, it's dangerous. I don't want to make a universal of this, but in the West, I think it describes this moment that we're in. And I think it's very timely that this program has that name. So as I said, Invented Religions is what I study and also what I produce. And as I said, it's a specific kind of new religious movement that tends to, I don't want to say it always does, but it tends to center around works of speculative fiction as scripture. So examples include Jediism that came from Star Wars, Matrixism that comes from the Matrix. Chaos magic is a complicated one because it's not necessarily a religion, but it functions in a similar way. And it kind of grew out of some of H.P. Lovecraft's fictional narratives. These are the three that I look at closely in my PhD, as well as religions emerging out of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. There's also another interesting kind of invented religion, which is more ironic and satirical. So this image that I'm showing you is from the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster, which is a fictional religion, but we have adherents to this religion in many, many countries, and they define themselves as Pastafarians. And they've created, again, a kind of a spoof religion. But what they do is they challenge the sort of state-sanctioned religious status that exists in many of our quote-unquote democracies. So for instance, this woman that I just showed you is attempting to be able to wear a pasta strainer on her head for any state-sanctioned identification, like a driver's license. She's using it as a way to argue that, why is it that certain religions get special status in the state and others don't? So some countries, I understand actually that Holland recently refused the Pastafarians' religious status, but New Zealand and Canada and a few other countries have recognized it as a religion. And as such, they get tax exemptions, which is, I think it's an interesting statement. But here again, this is a slight exception to the majority of invented religions, which use a specific work of popular fiction, usually in film, but sometimes in comic books, sometimes in novels, as their scripture. Scientology is another one that is kind of hard to describe, but actually, I don't know if you've seen the documentary Going Clear. I highly recommend it if you haven't. It's about Scientology. Once people get really deep into the religion, because L. Ron Hubbard, the person who invented Scientology, was a science fiction writer. And when you get deep into the religion, you get to the kind of core mythology, which involves a space alien named Xenu who came to Earth. And so we, at the core of this, we have a very interesting, I'm screen sharing, yeah. We have a very interesting relationship between speculative fiction, imaginary world building narratives. I'm just getting the note that my internet is unstable. Am I clear?
You are in and out just right now. You
Yeah.
were completely clear and then you gone
In and
back.
out. Is it bad enough that I should switch the Wi-Fi, or can we work with it?
Not yet. Still is decent, so we can understand.
Okay. Okay. Maybe give me like 2 hands up like this if we need to switch the Wi-Fi.
Okay.
I apologize. I live in a medieval village just outside of Rome, and our Wi-Fi is not the most dependable at all times. So let's just get back to the PowerPoint here. Again, I won't read this full quotation, but basically this is from Carol Cusack, who is the world leading expert on invented religions. And she created the category of invented religions in religious studies. And basically, the important part here that she says, in the contemporary West, it is possible now to observe religion emerging in real time before our eyes through the use of play, narrative, humor, the whimsical use of the category of the sacred, and experiences of Durkheimian collective effervescence. In short, what she's saying here is that the religions that we know of, you know, that we've either grown up in or that we've studied or we've encountered. If you accept my premise that these are artworks that have been created over thousands of years by thousands upon thousands of artists, developed gradually, modified, shifted, integrated, assimilated. What she's arguing is that with these new invented religions like Jediism coming from Star Wars, we're actually watching the ways in which religions start. And very possibly in 200 or 300 years, Jediism could be just an established religion. It might not even be ironic anymore. It might not even be funny anymore, because once it becomes established, it takes on a new form. So my religion that I've created as an artist is called Religion Virus. The vir.us is also because it's a web. Its temple is based on the web, so you can access it, www.religionvire.us. But in the spirit of my definition of religion as a form of multimedia production, I've also decided to produce or to create a production company that produces my religion. So I work with specialists, multimedia specialists of a variety of different kinds to work together to produce large-scale transmedial episodes of my religion in various cultural spheres. So that production company is called Religion Virus Transmissions. And I approach the idea, I mean, I use religion virus, I approach the idea of religion as a virus because I think religions operate in a viral way. They spread through their host bodies, they infect, and I would even go so far as to say that large-scale institutionalized religions are similar to a pandemic. They are extremely successful at assimilating and organizing large groups of people through conversion. And I would argue that that conversion has a great deal to do with art and how creatively they're able to construct beliefs. So I appropriate some of the aesthetics that have emerged from COVID to talk about the way in which religion spreads. So here you have a little map of the places that my religion virus has spread throughout the world. And I refer to any performance, exhibition, publication, screening. I describe that as a transmission. So religion virus transmissions is the religion or the religion production company, and a transmission is any event that I produce anywhere. At the core of my work is the creation of a queer religion. And as many of you know, I mean, I grew up queer and Jewish, and I was, you know, it was explicitly clear from scriptures and from the culture at the time that being queer meant I was not sacred. And most.
Hello, can you hear me? I think you need to change your.
Hi.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I changed and I'll hop back in. Give me one moment.
Also, to the students, if you would like to, if you're thinking of asking some questions, please write them on the chat, and at the end I will call you so you can ask directly, but just to keep a mental note of who would like to ask.
Should we type them in the chat or ask personally?
Ask personally,
Okay.
but just like say a question, and then yeah, we can know at the end who would
I
like
think
to
what
ask.
we ask you is just drop them in the chat, and then now we'll call you in to ask your question personally, definitely. But just so that, you know, he knows who to ask in a way.
Okay, then type the questions.
Yeah. And then what you do usually, and now we just pick them up and then go.
Perfect. We have the first one from Kayla. But okay, M, you're back.
Am I back? Am I
Excellent.
clear? Am I
Yes,
clear?
You're very clear.
Okay, good. Where did I break up? Sorry, I can just jump where I stopped, but if I started to break up at a particular point, I can backtrack.
Okay, just carry on from where you stopped.
Okay, so I'm still screen sharing?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so basically what I was starting to say is that my religion is ostensibly queer, and that's strategic because religions as we know them have excluded queer people, or when I was young, it was understood that being queer meant that I was not necessarily sacred. And so I produce an overtly queer religion as a response to that. But I also, as you can see on this artwork here, I propose even the idea that religion at its core is queer. And that's a complicated one I don't have time to go into completely. I'd be happy to discuss it if anyone's interested after. But very often we see kind of gender nonconformity and or homosexuality aligned often with the spiritual office in various different cultures. And if we look at sort of the gender specific groupings of a number of religions, we can also, and if we look at the Vatican and the Catholic Church, we can see in a dark way the relationship that exists between those two forms. But in a larger whole, I try and produce my religion as a way for to create a space where I produce new queer iconographies that expand the category of the sacred. So I have about 10 minutes left, but I guess maybe I could add maybe 12 to that just because there was some digital problems. So I'm going to just kind of cover things a little bit quickly, but this is really important. And I really wanted to say this here. I'm very honored to be here at the beginning of your symposium and process. And I think it's important when we're dealing with religion and the word religion that everybody think about this. This is a very good book. I highly recommend it. It's by Daniel Dubuisson. It's called The Invention of Religions. And basically he goes so far as to say that the word religion comes from religio, which was Latin, and it was used in ancient Rome, but it describes something completely different than what we now use the word religion to describe. This quote from his book is very important, and I would really like you to think about it. And just, I ask you to think about what you think about religion before you access this quote. What he says is, the reader who does not have a training in philology or in solid training in philology would imagine in good faith that religions exist everywhere, since words exist everywhere that are translated by and correspond to the West's indigenous term. At the same time, the originality of every culture is erased in favor of a uniform, fundamental, religious version of humanity that conforms to the unique and universal model imposed by the West. So just very quickly to say that the universities in the Anglo-Saxon, the English-speaking universities emerged out of Christianity. They were Christian institutions. And so the very concept of religion was developed through a Judeo-Christian lens. meaning that the assumption that religions just exist everywhere is not correct. There are all kinds of different belief practices and systems of spirituality, but the way that we assume every culture has a religion comes from that kind of Judeo-Christian framework. And what Dubuisson argues is basically that we read all other religions through this Judeo-Christian lens. So I've of course used the word religion quite a bit in this presentation, but I'm very specific in my work. I was raised Jewish, I live now in Italy. I am responding to the Judeo-Christian construct. But when we use the term to describe other belief systems or practices, we should be careful, and we should consider the extent to which this is part of sort of Western hegemony, that is framing our constructions. Okay, sorry, I have to. The other aspect of my work, I mean, I guess this comes out of my research practice, is a program that I've developed called Invent Your Own Religion, which takes a lot of the research that I've done in invented religions and creates a game, a kind of workshop that people can do to create their own religion based upon a fictional story that they are excited by or drawn to. And I've created the Invent Your Own Religion workshop. It's like a little book. I will send it through to University Underground, and anyone who wants to do it, please feel free. So now I'm gonna have to a little bit rush through this, but when I talked about religion being a multimedia production, I started to think about, what are the particular medial forms that are necessary to produce a religious experience? So you remember I gave that analogy, if you could hear it with the bad Wi-Fi. I gave the analogy of a church, and so you've got the paintings on the wall, and you have the sculptures, and you have the book, and you have the music, and you've got the architecture, etc. All of those are artistic media. But I go so far as to say that those are religious prosthetics. Now, what is a prosthetic? Of course, let's say you lost your hand, and then you get a prosthetic, which is an artificial hand that is designed to function in the same way as a hand. Now, if I encounter you with your prosthetic hand, I see that it is artificial, but I also understand that it is your hand. I believe that religious artworks function in a similar way. So here's my first example. This is a painting of Jesus holding a lamb, which is part of the Christian iconography. It's called the Good Shepherd iconography. Now, this is a painting, but it's called an icon. What is the difference between an icon and a painting? An icon is a painting that was made with a specific religious intent. Now, it just so happens that the Christians did not create this iconography. Christianity is a very, it absorbs mythologies and the systems that it attempts to convert. So this is actually a sculpture from ancient Greece of the ram bearer. So where Jesus is depicted holding a lamb, and the lamb is supposed to symbolize the sort of the weak, or the being that needs to be tended for. In the ancient Greek context, the ram bearer was a hyper macho, like masculine performance that would happen once a year, where an athletic, gorgeous male would walk around the village holding this ram to perform his masculinity. And then this is an image from a Matthew Barney film called The River of Fundament, which took that iconography and remixed it. And I bring this in because I grew up Jewish. I didn't necessarily know all of the Christian iconographies. I wasn't aware of the source code of the iconography of the Good Shepherd until I saw this Matthew Barney film, when I saw this character carrying the dog in that way. And I thought, that just seems so religious. But I don't know why. And then I started to study it and realized that through my life, I've encountered all of these images of Jesus holding the lamb, which programmed me to automatically interpret that image as religious. So this is an image from my own mythology of a kind of a genderqueer priest holding a deer instead of a lamb or a ram. Here we have the Pietà, which also gets remixed. I mean, we've got David LaChapelle, who takes Jesus, puts Jesus in the place of Mary Magdalene, and then puts Michael Jackson in the place of Jesus, and Guillermo Gomez Peña, Marina Abramovich. I have to be careful with time, so I'll just sort of scan through these. And then here is my own evocation of the Pietà in a stained glass image that I produced. I began to research the making of the stained glass. So I learned how to make stained glass properly because it produces a powerful religious prosthetic. One of the problems I face as an artist working in white cube spaces is, how do I transform a gallery into a kind of temple that can produce a religious experience? And one of the main strategies I use is to darken the space. And so I was interested in the stained glass window because of its religious associations. And so I started to produce my own kind of stained glass, which I call hyper icons. And I've been writing a graphic novel, which is the kind of Bible or scripture of my mythology. And I took the pages of those graphic novel and put them onto this stained glass format. And then you can see the picture on the I guess on the left, I think would be your left. We construct them as light boxes. So we install them in the space, and it gives the impression of being inside of a kind of a church or a temple, but it also provides the opportunity for the audience, if they want to read the graphic novel or learn the mythology of the story, they can walk right up to it and learn it from there. This came also from my project Temple of Artifice, which is a web-based digital temple. You can all visit it. Religionvire.us, as well as www.templeofartifice brings you to my web-based artwork. This is another example. It was a video version using the same thing, projection inside of a medieval tower. Also, I'm interested in the Bible as a religious prosthetic. It's one of the most recognizable religious prosthetics in the world. And in the West, if you travel in hotel rooms, you'll find one generally in every drawer. So here we have Genesis Briar Priorage, who remixed it and created their own psychic Bible. And then in starting to create my Bible, I did a series of performances where I literally created a kind of medieval scriptorium, and I would illuminate and inscribe my Bible live for like 5 or 6 hours a day for multiple days. So this was in Helsinki. This was a more kind of like raver, well, it's more linked with my aesthetic, which I performed in Minsk, Belarus. And I'm preparing, the next version of this project is that I'm going to convert retail stores and shopping centers into sci-fi temples. And I'm going to sit there and illuminate my Bible for all the hours that the shopping center is open for 1, 2, or 3 months. I'm also working with a bioartist in Australia to combine my own DNA with the DNA of seaweed to grow a skin for my Bible. Traditionally, Bibles were printed on parchment, which was typically goat skin that was treated. I wanted to echo that, but use my own body. So in about 6 months, I'm going to Australia to work in a lab to grow the skins of my Bible. And that project is called Skin Bible. Here's just another remix where I take pre-existing recognizable religious iconographies. This is Caravaggio's crowning with thorns, and I converted it into the crowning with horns in my own mythology. And these are just some examples of other appropriations in this sense. I have the Kabbalistic tree of life, which I recoded into a triangle using the similar sort of spiritual associations with each of the 10 Sephirot, but I brought it into my own mythology and created my own gods that resemble those gods. And then here we have the source code of the stone circle, which I used, but I recoded it to being a bone circle. So in my iconography, many of the planets in my sci-fi mythology have these bone circles. And I attempt to create this recognizability that people would see, okay, that looks like a stone circle, but it's made of bones. I want people to access common, popular, religious or archaeological images, which then I remix to recode their meanings subtly. So, okay, actually it's pretty good. It's like 2:40 and I'm proud of myself. Normally I'm only halfway through by this point. So I just want to end by saying I mean, we're excited to have a conversation about this. I'm going to distribute the Invention of Religion workbook if you would like to use it. But at the core here, what I want to convey is that I'm interested in making religion open source. And I think that this project, the Invent Your Own Religion workshop in inventing one's own religion, is a way to unplug from the matrix of all levels of religious coding, because we don't even realize how much of our lives have been shaped by, particularly in the West, by religious superstructures. Inventing your own, creating your own, either from your own mythology or using an established mythology, is a way to liberate yourself from that and liberate others. So, yeah, here's the final, the front page of the book. I will, it can be distributed amongst everyone, and I'll leave it there and now roll into questions. So maybe I'll stop screen sharing, actually.
Yes, thank you so much, Em. I love this presentation, and yeah, very provocative points that I'm loving, and I can see already the flow of questions here. So let's start with, who was the first one? I think Kayla, you have a few questions, so roll them, please.
I was just curious if you differentiate between belief as a cognitive thought versus a feeling.
Yeah, it's a great, important question. I'm not sure that I'm at the level yet of determining that differentiation. As I said, like, if I use the example of justice, if we believe in justice, I think it's largely cognitive. But at the same time, justice can be a feeling. When justice has been served, it has an emotional response for people, but it's based on a concept. So I guess I'm interested in the kind of feeling. I think it's maybe more a feeling that I'm interested in as it relates to art, in that when you surrender to a fiction, this process is described, actually was described by J.R.R. Tolkien as the suspension of disbelief. So what does it mean to suspend your disbelief? I think it means to open yourself to be moved by an experience that may or may not cognitively be true, but it allows you a bodily, emotional experience of an event. And I think there's some dissonance that happens. And this is why I say I want to believe is so important, because I've been to things that that activate a response in me, that for instance, UFOs and alien stuff. I do want to believe that. And so as soon as I encounter anything that looks remotely like a fact, I start to feel that it's real. But then my discipline comes in and says, look at this very carefully, look at this very critically, don't necessarily allow yourself to move through that. So I think, to briefly answer your question, I think what I'm looking at myself in terms of the relationship with art is a visceral, experiential, emotional aspect. But I do think the cognitive dimension to it is maybe the next step that I have to look into.
Perfect. We have another question by Fran.
Yeah, that's me. First of all, thank you very much for your amazing presentation. Very interesting work. I'm assuming that you know the work of LaVey, Anton LaVey, the founder of Satanism.
To be honest, I very broadly, but I've not delved into it. So please, if you can just roughly introduce the context to the question, I'll see if I can answer it.
Yeah, no, I was asking just how would you compare his, the religion that in a way he also made up himself 2 years, because I find some parallels. I find that his proposal is also towards like a free way of thinking, but in a way, although you are more also free in aesthetics, I find that your proposal is more serious and in a way more ethical. So it's just, but I don't want to direct your answer. So I was asking, how would you compare both practices?
Francisco, do you mind writing the name of the author into the chat box as well? Because for a lot of people, English is not their first language, so sometimes the reference, the names, and so on. It's if you don't mind putting it there. Thank you.
As I said, I should be careful because I only know some generalities and superficialities around it. The one thing I believe I know about Satanism as a religion and the way that I would look at it in terms of my own is that it is a remix, right? It takes an established mythology that sort of presupposes certain meanings, as in Satan is the devil, Satan is negative, Satan, or even the serpent in the Garden of Eden is a deceptive entity. It takes that and then recodes that mythology in order to sort of produce a new meaning. It's the same thing. Popular culture example is the Wizard of Oz, with the green evil witch, and then the new musical that was made called Wicked, where they tell the story of the green witch, but all the oppression she suffered, and they sort of reroute the projections and assumptions around that character through the telling of a new story. So I would say, again, not knowing very much, I think that what connects us probably is this remixing instinct, which says, okay, rather than create a whole new religion, that doesn't even resemble, I could create a religion of pink clouds. And then if an audience encountered it, they wouldn't necessarily even know that it's a religion. They would just see a bunch of pink clouds. I'm interested in taking pre-existing mythological superstructures and remixing them in order because I know that everyone in the West has been inundated by these systems and the moral assumptions that come with them. So I would, again, maybe I leave it there, knowing just the bit that I know around what Satanism is doing and how it's functioning. I mean, even there's issues, right? There was a Satanist sculpture unveiled at somewhere in the United States recently, and people were protesting. I mean, they're doing something very similar to the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster. Well, if you can have Jesus outside, why can't we have Satan? Or, these are fundamental questions. I don't know enough about the belief practices to be able to speculate, but I would just say in terms of the remixing, I think that we share an understanding, which is that we can't escape the programming that comes with Judeo-Christian mythology, but we can recode it.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Em. So next question is by Irem.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. I really enjoyed it. My question is actually about maybe your starting point, because we have queer activism, which basically wants to deconstruct all the hierarchical and vertical structures of the religions, especially the prominent monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But we also have queer people who are still practicing those religions, staying in that status quo, but still trying to break certain things. But then there's this contra argument by the people living in the countries ruled by really dominant religions. For instance, my country, I live in Turkey, and there's this really big thought saying that, well, I mean, you can't be queer or feminist or whatever, and Muslim or Christian or whatever. And, this is a very old and very huge discussion, so I don't want to take so much time. But actually, I wanted to ask you, like, how do you see those arguments and discussions, and why staying in that status quo, but still trying to change things is not enough? Because I'm also in that line, but I spent so much time thinking about it. So I wanted to ask you. Thank you.
That's a great, thank you. It's a great question. And we could talk about it for hours. So I'll just do my best to summarize that. I think all of the work is important. I mean, all aspects of the work is important. My work, I'm often asked to present at theological seminaries. I performed in a Christian church. I've performed my work in synagogues. I've encountered a number of very cutting edge religious thinkers who recognize that that religions, in order to be relevant, need to evolve. And that can only be done by those who are within their superstructures, altering the codes from within. I've chosen, for a number of reasons, not to be within any one of those constructs. I think I'm more effective outside, and I'm inherently suspicious of any large-scale institutionalized religion. As I said, I conceive of them as pandemics. But at the same time, I see the relevance of, let's say, queer religious scholars or queer, I know a number of queer rabbis, for instance, who are able, through exhaustive analysis of the ancient texts, they're able to find queer ghosts in stories that don't necessarily convey that. So, Joseph's, the story of Joseph in his, the musical Joseph in the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, but the story of Joseph in his coat, I mean, there's a number of Jewish queer theorists who say Joseph was queer, and this is a queer story. I think that work is very important and very interesting, but I also recognize the traps of it, because you also fall into tokenism, religions that are wanting to evolve are interested in very often adapting so much as they can in order to stay relevant, but not necessarily being flexible about the core teachings. So, I mean, the foundation, sorry, and I'll say this as a provocation, and then I'd be happy to have the conversation. And I'll just say this: if anybody wants to talk about these things outside of here, please feel free to email me. I'm very happy to have these conversations. But I'll just say this: if you go into the Torah, which is where we have the origin of the anti-gay texts, the fundamental essence of, like, man shall not have sex with another man. Now that's listed at the next line says, man shall not have sex with an animal, and man shall not pull his penis out of a vagina before he comes. Those sins are all equal. So ejaculating on the floor instead of inside of a vagina is just as bad as ejaculating inside of an anus. And the reason for that is that the Jewish origin story was all about building up a new nation. So they needed all the sperm they could get. And the fact that it says, don't fuck animals, don't have gay sex, and don't ejaculate on the floor, first of all, is there because people were doing all of those things. Second of all, to say, right now our priorities are, we need to build a people. So this was not an inherent value judgment. The assumption even that sodomy was destroyed because of homosexuality has, most theologians don't even take that seriously. But so something like that, I can talk about that fine as a queer scholar, as an artist, I can talk about that in the public sphere. But a rabbi, a queer rabbi who can talk about that with other rabbis and who can back it up and who can debate the scriptural text, they're doing a different kind of work that's very, very valuable. But I couldn't do it because I couldn't live under the oppression of that system. But I also recognize that we're all playing our part in deconstructing this. And again, I'd love to talk about it more later if you'd like.
Perfect. Maybe we have like 3 minutes for a last question. So next one in line is Chloe Kelly. Chloe.
Hi, sorry, my internet cut out. I hope it's okay now. I just wanted to ask about actually kind of more of a practical question about the installation of your work when you spoke about showing it in art galleries, because I'm interested in a lot of the criticism that like installation art gets, that it's kind of sometimes when it is criticized as being like overbearing or too tokenistic and not giving space for like reflection art and stuff like this. And this is very similar to how you describe religious spaces and as having communicate as did you have anything to say on this, like how you connect these religious imagery that you make and maybe the practice of installation in an art gallery, and also how you spoke about shopping centers as also a space that you will show your work. Yeah, more like a spatial question, I guess.
Yeah, okay. I don't know if it was just my Wi-Fi, but your audio was breaking up a bit at certain points. But no, it's okay. I mean, I think I got the gist, but in case I'm off a little bit, I might have just missed a core thing. I want to direct you to an essay by a person named Hilda Hein, which I think it's called the Museum. It's called the Museum as Secular Temple. And she actually basically talks about the fact that, you know, the art museum came out of the temple. I mean, it comes out from, it emerges from, the architecture emerges from the temple. With the French Revolution, its reference point is that, right? And a temple is publicly accessible, potentially depending on the cult or the religion, but even the acoustics, the design, the architecture is intentional there. And then the art gallery, you know, it is a kind of secular temple where people come to a non-dogmatic temple, let's say, where you come to maybe have a similar experience as those who are going to a church or an established temple, but it's operating in a different way. I'm interested, I guess, in when I talk about sort of transforming it from a white cube into a space for encounter. I'm interested in the notion or the idea that art is a worthwhile replacement for religion. And I think that the idea, you know, while I appreciate the relevance of having temples from all these different ancient time-honored religions, I think there's a book, it's called 7 Days in the Art World. It's by an ethnographer who basically did anthropology on the art world. And she says that the art world is a church for atheists. And, you know, I like this idea. I'm like, okay, this is a more interesting, I think it's still the same source code as a temple, but we're doing something different. And because different artists transform it, you know, potentially with the curator acting like priest, and the artist, in a sense, acting like a section of scripture, we have like constantly changing meaning mechanisms that are providing us the community environment that we would get from religious centers and the ritual aspect. And then just briefly, I'll just say the thing about the shopping center is that the shopping center is the temple of consumerism, and consumerism arguably is a religion. And the shopping center is also a place where people go to buy and imagine their futures. Like you go there to buy a new outfit or buy a new couch or buy something that is your new self. And so for me, the shopping center is a temple of consumerism and a temple of fantasy. And so if I can create my sci-fi installation there where people don't necessarily know they're about to experience art, or they don't know they're about to challenge their assumptions of religion, if I create this in this way that looks like, I mean, I'm going to sell merchandise just like they do at the Vatican. I'm going to be, you know, like it's going to look from the outset kind of like, I don't know, like a Star Wars store or something. But then when they get inside, they're going to have access to what I'm doing. I think that's more interesting. I think it's more relevant than putting something in a gallery that only a small percentage of the population can access.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we are, you know, like at the limit. One last thing. Could you please type in the chat what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah.
If the students would like to ask you further questions.
Yeah.
And yes, thank you so much for joining. We appreciate your time, Em, and we will continue with our symposium.
Yeah. See you all in a bit. Thank you.
See you.